McCracken.
Rosie.
Welcome to the On Meaningful Work podcast. This is a long time coming,
It is indeed.
and I'm not sure how would I was thinking of something to say in terms of who are you to me, like friend, muse, business partner,
Dance floor
dance
buddy.
partner. We've been through a lot together, and besides working with you, you are one of the most dearest people in my life. So it's really glad to talk to you. It's a bit weird talking with these microphones in front of us
I know.
because
We'll forget they're there in a
yeah,
minute.
because yeah. Anyway, so welcome,
Thank you.
and
Finally made the cut.
finally did. Yeah. So maybe to start off, what's your origin story? Like, where are you from? Like, where did you come from?
I mean, what realms are we going to?
We'll start with the Gaia, the earthly
Yeah,
realm.
the earthly realm. I am a first generation born on my father's side in Australia from a long line of English, Irish and Scottish folk. And on my mother's side, a fifth generation born in this country. It's always interesting being asked that question because so much of my journey, like my path in my work life, but my personal life, which has kind of crossed over, is really around this question of where's my root system? And I'm a fruiting body of a mycelium network that has been cut off from what I know it was. And I've popped up on this continent that I love dearly, but I know deep in my bones is not home to me and has never felt home in the sense of an ancestry. It's home now because of the world that I've sort of created for myself. But yeah, I find the conversation around identity, or particularly origin story, something that's shaped, like that the root system is literally what shapes my everyday. And straddling that discomfort in the work I'm doing, especially in Australia and, around whose land am I standing on and how are they leading us. And that's been a story in Australia that's been horrific and devastating.
For sure, and we'll definitely get into that. But is there any way that you do feel at home, or do you feel?
Oh, I mean, if you asked me that question a few years ago, I think I roamed the earth quite furiously, trying to find that place of home, until I really embedded a number of practices that are real lifelines for me, especially the practice of a sit spot. And through a sit spot every day, even when I've been living on the road for years, and even though that sit spot might change a day, paying attention to the web around me wove me in, and I just kind of slowly was called back to like the greater web that we're all in.
Yep.
And yeah, I feel like now I feel at home when I know what the seasons and the cycles are doing and where the birds are and what's growing in the biosphere that I'm in, and being able to tend to that in some way. I feel like I'm connecting myself back into it. But definitely it's been, there's still a homesickness for a place that I'm trying to find, which is this lineage that, is hard to find.
Sure.
Kind of lost.
But you did grow up in Perth?
I did.
Yeah.
I grew up in Perth and I moved over here to Melbourne and about 10 years ago, and I've sort of been journeying around since, in the back of the troopy mainly, and but Perth's not home for me at all. Yeah.
But what was it like growing up in Perth? Like, what were you as a little girl? What was your childhood like?
My childhood was, on the videos that I have, I'm kind of always in the background, like singing to something or talking to an imaginary friend. So my childhood was a regular childhood. Two of the things that stand out about my childhood now when I look back is, the first one is one of the other questions that that propels me in my work is, my work in the world is like, what are we called to protect? And yeah, as a 10-year-old, I had this really strong attachment with the park that was opposite the road, and they were going to, they have put a freeway through it, and I'd made signs and posters for all the neighbours around the long-necked turtle and the birds in the park, and really trying to fire up people to fight for something. And it wasn't something that my family was leading or involved in. It was just this deep connection I had to this park and this outrage as a 10-year-old. And I really kind of followed that path of that outrage. But the other sort of part of my childhood is, if I walked down the driveway and looked left and looked right, most people looked like me. And I found that deeply concerning from a young age, and wondered how we could be living in a world with so much diversity, but my street, everyone looked the same and talked the same. And that kind of made me want to get out of Perth so quickly. And it's not just Perth, it was just the situation of me growing up. And
so I suppose as a young person, that knowledge of diversity and what the world has to offer, where did that come from? Were you...
I think, I mean, my grandma, when I think about her, she had deep connection to nature, and part of that connection was pointing out different species and different plants and animals, and I think just naturally that started to shape my knowing that the world is made up of diversity. And my dad and mum were really quite passionate about bringing the culture that they had access to into our world. And so through music mainly. And so that also sparked this knowing. But I think the biggest thing, and it's still up in my dad's house, is my parents put a map of the world up in the living room that's the size of the wall. And it's been there since I was a child. And we would sit on the couches, and instead of like watching a TV, which we never watched, we would watch the other side, like the wall, which was the world map. And that, from this, from a young age, having a wall taken up by a world map is just sparks a curiosity around who is out there, what are they doing, what do they feel, and then those questions, my parents were so supportive of answering those. And we had, above that, we just had a whole shelf of encyclopedias, and it was kind of like this curiosity from the map, and then an exploration of who lived there. And my brother and I would talk about all the places we were going, and we've spent our life like visiting those places and really following that thread. So that kind of it took me from the small street level, but in the living room things were expanding, which I'm so grateful for.
But also I think when I imagine you as a little girl, which I don't very often, so don't worry. It almost feels like you were this singular flower in this field, almost like you were this singular person. Did you find this connection or relatedness within your family, or maybe it was through books or music or anything like that?
Question of what, sorry?
Of relatedness, like you identify with this person or this thing or this piece of art, or
I mean, yes and no. I've always felt like my parents still say to me, like, I think we took the wrong baby home. And I've always really felt like, and there's a story around the zygote syndrome, which is, the baby that's getting carried by the stalk and so excited to like explore Earth that falls out of the basket like a street too early and like pops up in a family where it doesn't really feel like you're almost certain that the family you're supposed to be from is in the next street. But and I mean that with like such love, because the family that I have are just phenomenal. But I think there was a tension for me growing up around I felt different and I thought different, and I really had to find kind of really that story around I really had to leave home to realise the relatedness I have within the family. But that nature and my connection like to nature has always been the one thing that's been the north, like the guide.
What were you like in school?
An asshole. Do you
We
remember
have that
when?
in common.
Yeah. You and I did an event maybe 8 years ago or something, and in the front row, my teacher had flown over.
Yeah.
My teacher had flown over from Perth
Yeah.
to surprise me at this event that I was speaking at. And when I asked why he was there, he said, because half the teachers still wonder if you went to jail or you actually did something.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think at school, I've always been interested in boundaries and playing with boundaries and living on the threshold. And I was at a Christian private school. And yeah, I actually had a really nice school experience, but I know that I was quite naughty. But when I look back now, I was impressing the teachers who would shut down questions. I think my mind and my respect comes from within conversations where it can be expansive and there's curiosity and also I don't know, but some of the teachers that would shut me down and not want me to speak, I would be an asshole.
And I don't know if I've asked you this, but how do you learn best? Is it through, it's like, I don't think it's from instruction from a teacher.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not.
Yeah.
No, I need to really be experiencing life to be learning it. And it needs to, for me, even just the year 12 exams, like I had a tutor for every subject. I really struggled to make sense of why I needed to learn these concepts that didn't, in my mind, relate meaningfully to my life. But when I am pulled to something where I can see meaning and connection, I throw myself into it, and it moves from like coming in, into my head and out of my mouth in that kind of like a loop of the head, and it weaves its way through my whole body, and it becomes deeply integrated. And then I can remember things and live into things that have meaning in my life and have relevance. And I really struggled with that at school, because I was just like, why are we all here? Like, what is the point? What are we all being schooled for? And what do these subjects mean? And who decides that? And can we have a conversation about that? And who actually is God? And can we talk about that? Or do we just have to recite the Bible? And these sorts of questions, I wanted to have bigger conversations. And so it was... and it was in some ways, a really lonely experience. It's kind of a strange thing being grouped with people in your postcode. And then you're made to feel in some way that these friendships and this whole thing is the most serious thing and the most important thing. And again, I'd just go home and lay on the couch and remember like staring at the world, like, I'll be out there one day. So I have to tick the boxes.
Yep.
And the tick the boxes thing, ironically, has become such a big part of my work, really challenging the systems that make us tick these boxes and having that freedom to question, like, why are we ticking those boxes? And surely there's a different way. And we don't all fit into this one way.
With school, though, like with those subjects you mentioned, was there any subject that you did gravitate?
Drama.
Why does that not surprise me?
I love drama, and I love English because I love writing, and they're my two loves. But I think I did geography because there was a fun camp, and I was choosing things for. It's just so strange. Just you have to choose these things, and the pressure and education in my family. Like, it's only. My dad went and studied, but in most of our family, it's not going to uni hasn't been a path at all. But it was something my parents were quite passionate about, that being an opportunity for me and my siblings. And I felt that pressure of, like, if I don't succeed in this, I've let my parents down. But I just didn't really see the point. So I had an agreement with my parents that I'd do my final maths exam, and that night I'd be on a plane to Europe as a 17-year-old, and that's the deal we had, and that's the deal that happened.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. Were there, besides uni, were there other expectations from your parents?
No. No, I've never. My parents are, the way they love is very freeing, and it's really shaped my life. It's kind of just give everything a crack and be as kind and generous as you can. But yeah, the uni expectation was a big one.
Yep.
Yeah.
How was Europe as a 17-year-old?
I went with mum and my sister. They came for the first month, and then sort of dropped me off at my mum's friend's house who had never met before, and I just moved in there, and then on my 18th birthday got on a Kentucky bus, as you do, and was initiated.
Kentucky, jeez.
I know. It reminds me of the time when I'd come back from that trip, and I was drinking so much fruity Lexia, and my mum came over one day and went into the fridge and popped my goon bag, and was like, "It's like you're on a Kentucky tour, but you're going nowhere." I went to Europe, and then came back and went to uni, and that's part of the thing, is that I really knew from a young age I wanted to do social work, and I'd organised my year 10 placement as a social worker at the hospital, and my parents said, social work's not very valued. I think you should do psychology. With this sort of misunderstanding that if you're a psychologist, you can be a social worker, and they're two separate things. So I pleased them for a semester and then changed to social work, which is
But just with social work, like in your childhood or early adolescence, were there any things, any events, any yearnings that sparked that desire, or was it?
It's kind of like it's a mystery in the sense that I just have these knowings. Like I just know I need to do something, and sometimes I know where they've come from, but sometimes it's just like, no, I'd never had a social worker in the family. I'd never. I don't know if I'd met one, but I think I was really interested in. My nana, and as a child I didn't know this, but as an adult I do that. My nana had quite a lot of mental health issues, in particular social anxiety and social phobias. So we'd actually, Nana wouldn't come to a lot of the school events, but my granddad would, and then he would sometimes steal the cake or whatever, and then we'd end up going to their house and sort of recreate the story for Nana as if she was there. And I think I felt into a lot of her pain, and as English migrants really had a hard time settling into the Australian town that they were in South Australia in Whyalla. The Australians, even though ironically were English, majority of them.
Wow.
So my mum's dad is sort of a quote saying, I've never liked never liked anyone from England, and they were really kind of ostracised, and so struggled to make friends and heavily judged for being English. And I think
that is so weird. I wouldn't have thought that.
I mean, but this is the strangest thing, because it's like, that's why I'm interested in time as well, generational time. It's like, it's only a couple of generations ago, and you're English, you're not Australian. It's so bizarre. I just can't. And that's the birth of this Australian person that was born at this time.
And if you extend that a little bit further, we are all sorts.
Exactly. And so I can feel that, again, it's that curiosity thing of what's happening here. But I just knew that I wanted to do social work. I think I've been living in a very sick body for a lot of my life. And I think...
You mean physically?
Physically sick. Lifelong chronic health and issues. And I think being in out of hospital and just witnessing and observing the health system and people's experience in it, and personally on an embodied level, a complete lack of power and a lack of choice and agency and a lack of voice. That's my own embodied experience, and I've always, I think, from a very young age, wanted to heal that within myself, but you know, saw that there was so much pain and wanted to work in the field of liberation of some sense, whilst feeling deeply powerless in my own.
Yeah. I mean, if you're open to talking about it, you know, I know there was a time when you were really sick and you had to have your spleen removed. But I'm trying to play. You mentioned like an incident at that time in the hospital involving someone else. I'm trying to piece together
Alice.
that story.
I was really, really sick, and they had nowhere to put me. So then I was living on the spinal ward, and until that point I'd had finished my master's in human rights law, but I was working largely in Indigenous rights and then asylum seeker rights. And I met Alice, who was my age and had gone to work and then had an accident. And she was a quadriplegic, and she was in hospital for 4 years, waiting, like nothing was medically wrong anymore. But there was a 16-year housing wait list at the time for a specialised accommodation.
Jeez.
And I think that propelled me into the field of disability, of just this hidden, it's hidden from the mainstream. It's very much alive in the community, but how is a woman who's in her early 30s and she's stuck in a hospital because there's no home for her to go into? And that kind of propelled me into that, and it was at the time of the birth of the National Disability Insurance Scheme, and the Convention of the Rights of People with Disability was being, it was all happening at the same time as of 2012 when this was all going on, and it was kind of just an eruption. And like I said before, I like to think of myself as a fruiting body on this network, and it was all just popping up, and that moved me into the space of disability and moved me into meeting you.
Yeah. We'll get to that, but I love this image of you as a fruiting body on top of this network, because I've never heard you describe yourself that way before, but it's kind of describes you to a T, because no one knows where you're going to pop up again.
I know my friends call me a sprite, but that feels too deracinated, I think a fruiting body is where, and also that knowledge or consciousness or what propels us isn't of the individual. It's we're in the it's this whole network that's moving and pulsating, and things are popping up everywhere. So I prefer to think of myself as that there's that, and there's this whole underground.
All right, so maybe going back to, say, after you finished uni, what was your first job?
Well, when I was at uni, I had a job that really changed things, which was I was doing support work, and this is kind of where my whole curiosity around how we are with each other started to burn. So I was doing support work, and a lot of it would be with elderly people. I would go to their homes and help them get out of bed and shower them.
Wow.
And dress them, and then we would have breakfast together or go shopping or whatever it might be. And I was kind of on the when someone was sick, I'd just pick up their people, their regular people. And I remember just going to a house one day, I think, looked at this note, and it said, pink flannel for the bum, blue flannel for the face. First name is this. And going into this room, I've never met this person before, and we introducing myself whilst at the same time expecting a vulnerability of undressing them and showering them, and that the information that I've been given is that pink's for the it just seemed so transactional in nature. And I'm studying social work, where these theories are talking about care and support networks, and these utopian societies, and meanwhile in between classes I'm getting people out of their bed who haven't spoken to someone in the 24 hours since the last random person got them out of bed. And sitting in this transaction of thinking something is not right here.
More boxes to be ticked.
More boxes to be ticked, but also our culture, and I talk about, meaning the culture that I'm from, or the Western culture that we're currently in, that's dominating, is exacerbating this dehumanized transactional approach to care. And we ask, where are the elders? Well, the elders, where are they? And when did they deserve, a little note with the flannel for the face and a flannel for the bum? When did we get to that? And so that was my first job. Like, that was my job during uni, but that really has stuck with me. It's like these questions that have come up over my life. Where's my root system? Where are the elders? What's the network that I'm part of that's, facilitating my fruiting body? These are questions that have just been shaping my psyche for so long. And as I, learn more and hear more and listen more, they just keep on getting deeper and deeper.
And with that experience, it was more, I suppose, it was the transactional nature that stuck with you. I mean, it wasn't the transactional nature that stuck with you, but the lack of kind of connection and the lack of, I suppose, acknowledgement of this person who is an elder.
I mean, it's kind of, for me, how I want to live, or in how I want things to feel, is I want things to feel relational. I want people to feel connected. I want people to feel valued. And that's the opposite of that. And that makes me question why. And that, for me, in my work, is the symptoms and the sickness of the post-industrial revolution. And we're getting to the, I hope, the later stages of this disease, but this is what we're feeling here. And it's the hard thing has been, how do you work as a social worker in a sick society, where, because it's how we treat our elders, and that experience is indication for me that things are sick.
And that, it's also, I think, a cultural question where here age is kind of dehumanized, whereas youth is celebrated.
I mean, ageism is rife. And even having these conversations with Dad at the moment, who's thinking of retiring, and really wondering what his value and purpose is, when he has so much value and purpose. It's just that it's been tied to a specific role, rather than being tied to him. And I think that's a question that most people ask at some point.
And I think also the question that I sometimes struggle with this podcast, because it's called the On Meaningful Work podcast, is that there is a distinction between meaningful work and a meaningful life. And usually they're not always, correlated. Like, you're not defined by your work.
I think, I mean, just before we started, I said to you, what is work? I think, when I think back to me doing those, the year 12 exams and the pressure of going to uni, and it's all because it's this to get a career and to work, and but I'm wanting to put posters in people's letterbox because Freeway's getting popped up, and it's at some point, and it's amazing when, I mean, I have had a life of meaningful work and a meaningful life, but I've enmeshed them together to be a way of living rather than a separation. And that's a privilege that I acknowledge that has been able to happen as well. But part of it has been actually having a disabled body for so many years. I haven't been able to fit the world of work. I need more sick leave. I need more days off. I need flexi hours. And all these things don't fit into a typical employer, package, which is been a blessing in disguise, because it's meant I've had to think really creatively, but also slog hard to carve out a life where I can work and to eat, but also follow like the burning passions inside of me. And I'm grateful for having sickness to be able to, in some way, being able to be forced into a position, even though there was a lot of heavy reliance on my parents, which is another privilege. But yeah, I didn't fit the world of work, and I didn't fit the world of work because I didn't fit the room. And in the room, you have, again, more tick boxes of the things that what people want to employ. Who is the person a place wants to employ, and I didn't always tick those boxes. And I'm saying that whilst acknowledging that I'm in a white body and in a settler experience on colonised land, and so I'm only ticking a couple of the boxes around being sick. There's all these other boxes where people are cut out as well.
Yep.
And I think the isms, which there are rife, they dominate the world of work, and so does the story that I'm desperately wanting to compost, as Sophie Strand talks about, which is the hero's journey. That it's this individual pursuit. We strive towards this career, that it's and it's
this noble
action, which is so deeply concerning for me, because I don't think that's what it's all about.
Yeah, which is, I think, fascinating, because the whole of, I think, Western mythology, even to current day, whether it's movies and books and all of that, that's the template. The hero's journey is the template. Like Star Wars is based on the hero's journey.
Most things are, and I'm interested in, we live multi-species intergenerational lives. Sitting here right now, I'm sipping this peppermint tea, which has come, from the plant, which has relied on good soil, which has relied on bacterial, which has relied on mycelium, which has relied on oxygen. And in my body is all of these beings, and I'm breathing in air, and we're in this constant relationship, and that's just here in this 1 second. And in the hero's journey, it's like, why are we celebrating the person who, no matter what, they've slayed, they've killed, they've colonized, they've conquered, and we're still bowing down to them as if, wow, you've done all of this stuff to get to this point. But I'm interested in, and who's holding you there, and who did you step on or rely on or depend on to get there? Because we don't live independent lives. We're completely dependent on each other. Yet our world of work has kind of stripped away that whole story and just taken out the individual. And with that, you have, I feel like that leads to extractive culture, exploitative culture, transactional culture, and that's, I feel like, the opposite of where I feel like we should be exploring.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It sounds to me, though, that you've had, maybe it's not a hero's journey, but you've had a journey similar in the sense that, there was this sense that you didn't fit in, and then you kind of went on this wanderlust to try and figure out your sense of place, your sense of who you are, the sense of, I suppose, kind of how, I wouldn't say limitations, but using your, what others might consider, your limitations, to then see how you can maximize those to fit into this world. So that's kind of a journey in itself.
It is a journey in itself, but for me, it doesn't fit. If it fit the hero's journey, I would have died. Yeah. I think the question is, the hero's journey for me is around me. I'm on my journey, and what am I shaping? What am I doing? But I want to talk about stories that are asking more around what's shaping me.
Yep.
And yes, there could be the framing of I'm on the journey and I'm feeling like I don't know where home is and I'm trying to seek it. Or what if the home on earth is actually seeking me? And there are all these relationships at play and people that I depend on and rely on. And there's this whole narrative that the story means nothing. It's not even a story without all of those other parts. I can't extract myself from the real story to talk about my hero, like my quest, because that would be an untrue a story. And I think the hero's journey, it is definitely shaped. It is it's the story of our current culture. And I really want to see it composted and see what we can grow from it, because I don't think it's serving us.
Yeah. Well, maybe I'm going back a bit then and into, say when I met you, you were kind of on this, I don't want to use the word journey, but you had come to a place.
We can use the word journey.
I'm scared to use the word journey now.
Oh my gosh.
We had come to this place where you were working in disability. How did you come to there?
To disability. I came out of hospital and I had finished my master's in human rights law, wanted to work in the policy space. And circling back to the Kentucky tour, a woman I met on the Kentucky tour who was my favourite friend when I was 18.
I need to go on a Kentucky tour.
I know, exactly. She had a friend who's an absolute genius, brilliant artist, Lauren Matthews, and she was leading a organisation, CEO of an organisation in early childhood disability, and hooked me up with a job. And as I said before, I had my own experience that was still very much in the depths of the NDIS was being birthed, the UN Rights Convention of People with Disability was being adopted and signed by Australia, and all these things were happening, and it just was like a is it Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz when she's in that
in the tornado?
She's in the tornado.
Yeah.
I was in a tornado of like change.
Did you end up in Kansas?
Yeah. I don't know if the NDIS is Kansas, baby, but
actually not to kind of poke the bear, but could you describe what the NDIS is? Just like a brief for people who would
No, we can use. I mean, with go back to Alice. Her story is, she was waiting as a kind of a passive recipient for a support system that was failing her. But at the time, disability supports were funded by the state, and so there's 100 spots. Like that's for the purpose of the story, 100 spots, and you wait till a spot's available, and then you get the supports you need or the home you need or whatever it might be. So disability organisations were funded by the state and to deliver these supports. The NDIS turned that on its head by funding the person to buy the supports that they need. So in that case, Alice would be funded to access the support she needs rather than wait for the state to have a spot for her. So it completely overnight radicalised disability rights and access to services, and it also overnight turned disability organisations that were, funded by the state into competitive, profitable, or even not-for-profit.
So it went from a funded system to a market.
Went to a market model overnight, and that was wild.
It was, and this is kind of getting to the point where we met. But yeah, and I suppose probably one of the first conversations we had was around this kind of Wild West almost of you traveling to the trial sites, and people are just so scared, they had no idea what was happening. Yeah, do you want?
Yeah, I got in my car and just drove around Australia. I was really interested in being a bridge between children and families. I was working in the children and family space. So children and families, the services that they wanted to access, and the government who was rolling this out. And it was a big experiment and a big test. And at the start of it, there was a lot of it was a trial, and so we got to, the feedback loop was quite strong. This is the experience of families, and this is what services are experiencing, and then kind of responding to that. And now it's a beast that's harder to shift and change, but still phenomenal people working in it. But yeah, traveling around, I think for me, I realised that I love what I'm here on earth for is listening to stories. And I think that in the whole tornado, the stories of people's experience was being left out. And because they always were left out. I mean, the question of, where are people around the table and who's actually making decisions? It's that, people making decisions for people or on behalf of people. It wasn't being led by people with disability. And so, yeah, I travelled Australia and had those conversations for years and years, really, being that conduit. And services, there wasn't enough. There's a workforce apocalypse. There wasn't enough, and there isn't enough services to meet the demand.
Yeah. And I suppose the conversation we had was, because at the time I was working with startups on their business modeling and service design and so on. And the conversation we had was really like the start of something for us.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And yeah, we got together. We started a little company called Balancing Act 3. And like for me personally, it was one of the most exciting, meaningful things that I've done, because I suppose my skill set, whatever it was, just being applied to this was really something. And I learned, a lot from you in that. And just about what I learned was really about kind of people and who they are and how they are defined, and they're not defined by just their bodies or how able they are. There's this whole story around them that's usually not seen.
Yeah, I think the thing I loved about Balancing Act, and I mean where the name came from, Life is a Great Balancing Act, is that what happened is that the bridge between business and humanity and innovation got kind of built in a night, because services had to adopt business models of which they've never needed before, because their funding would come in guaranteed every month, and that would pay the staff, which would, so overnight they're having to do that. And the best thing about it was overnight people are saying, I don't want your shit service anymore.
Yeah.
I don't want to go on your bus to bingo. I want to be going to gigs. I want to live my life, because this ableist society we live in, that just the whole setup of what the belief system of what people with disability, how they live, what they yearn for, what their desires are, is just absolutely smothered by an ableist system that just threw a bone. And that uprising was powerful, and it's like, I'm not, if you don't meet these needs, you'll go out of business, which is a good thing,
Yep.
And I loved working in that innovation space. It was just, we just saw the creation of the response to what people needed just blew up.
Yeah, but also it was a response to what people needed, but there was, this is say around 2016, there was a bit of a lot of denial as to what was needed internally for organizations, for these service organizations. And, one of the first workshops we ran, and just the conversation around business and revenue, that was just anathema to people. We could literally saw people just cower in their seats. And
but it goes back to the flannels. And hear it all the time is that services would say, we're not in it for the money. We don't want to talk about dollars. We just want to, we're here to help. Then the other side of that, it's like, well, I want to pay for a service because I want a high quality service which helps me live the life I want to live. And there wasn't any business vernacular really for people to adopt, but there was high expectations by the community of saying this is what we want. So rapid change, and with rapid change also comes, or market opportunity comes, businesses that had the money and had the know-how that dominated the market, that weren't necessarily the ones who had the relationships and were embedded in the community. They were the ones that could market themselves well, and that's been a shame as well to see the erosion of community-led, community-based organisations who, I guess, got a little bit left behind but didn't have the resources to know how to pivot fast enough. And to see that happen in disability services has been heartbreaking, especially working with those community organisations. And for a long time I've advocated that to have a fully responsive, integrated, holistic healthcare and disability system, there needs to be a bit of both. The individual control is phenomenal, and never take that away, but that there are some things that services can do and could support from state funding and Commonwealth
not the
funding.
Market-based.
Yeah, not the full market, but like a mix. And I know that that's controversial, but it's a system that I find really hard to navigate, and I've literally been in it since the drafting of the legislation. So I know it inside and out, and I still don't know it. So to try and navigate it when you're holding everything else is a bit of a disaster.
And actually, I haven't really asked you this, but when you think back on Balancing Act, what do you think about? Like, what comes up for you? What?
Just thinking about Cambodia then. Well, we had a planning time when I was living in Cambodia. What comes up for me is one of the learnings is we saw a need for services, and there was so much change that people had their heads in the sand, and there was just so much overwhelm, and to get your head around overnight what you had to change in your business, for example. And we were working with that on the front line almost, as first responders in these organisations to change. And it was hard, and disability was still and is a area that's underfunded, that's not talked about, that doesn't have the glitz and the glamour of like the tech scene and other areas. And so it was struggle to get people to give a shit really and invest in what we knew was needed. So I think back to it it was a really beautiful and much needed little niche that we needed way more of a community.
Perhaps
to get that.
ahead of its time. Perhaps. Yeah, wow. No, I think for me as well, it was, I think, a lot of work, but I go back to that. We were kind of ahead of our time, because I think just the conversation around business and revenue and money, I just got the feeling that they weren't kind of ready to have that yet.
And it's like, I mean, we're living in strange times.
Mm.
And I think it's just a thread in this conversation of, you know, where are our elders? How are we treating our elders? It's this mixing the world of business, which has actively excluded disabled people from it because of productivity issues or perceived productivity issues, when those assumptions and ways of working and being interact with a service system that has been largely working in the dark, underfunded, not regulated to an extent, poor quality, not necessarily the services, but just doing the best they can, but not having the opportunities to do more because they're kind of capped in innovation and capped in thought by the government funding them. It's like the combination just was a really weird experience. Like it's overnight, you know, could smell the fox at the door or the wolf at the door that's seen a business opportunity. And the organisations that really were embedded in their community and doing everything they could and going above and beyond were really good at what they did, but didn't have anyone in the organisation that knew necessarily everything about business because you didn't need to.
Because I think that's a struggle as well, where it's this different type of mindset that you needed, and for one organisation to have, you know, to expect of their staff two separate mindsets, it's really tough. No, I don't want to really talk about kind of the stuff you're doing now, but also just your connection to country and your connection to the land and your connection to the ancestors of this land and indigenous, you know, I think you have this real it's more than connection. I'm trying to figure out the word, but there's something that's so deep that
I think it's the question I started with is what is my root system? And wherever I go, anywhere I ask, you know, whose land am I standing on? And that gives me a really, you know, that question leads me to discovering, like truth telling and knowing the story of the place. And from a young child, I knew that the land speaks. And I think what's my passion and what I think is available to us is that most of our ancestors, and I'm saying our now in terms of the thing we have in common across the world, our greatest commonality across cultures is that the world is animate. And that it's only since the rise of agriculture and then the Industrial Revolution that we have taken the animate out of everything. But actually 99.9% of our of our ancestors, no matter what our cultures were in deep relationship with the land. The rocks were the grandfathers. They knew when the crow lands on your house, there's a message there. You know, when the bird sings, like there is this deep knowing and relationship and a prayer to gods that bring rain and a prayer to the gods that bring the harvest, and we have this ritual, and this is not me and thankfully this is not me appropriating anyone's culture. This is something I can say I had once upon a time, and actually the cells in my body are made up of more of that time than they are of the recent time that has been, you know, part of the lineage that has been colonizing and moved from those root systems. And so if I stretch time and I think about the majority of my ancestors, I can touch into this place that feels so right to me, which is that the world is alive. And that then, because I live here and I live up in the Kimberley, and for me that area is deeply spiritual, and the veils between the world is very thin, and Aboriginal culture is strong and centered, and time is different. And so I've been able to experience that and be welcomed into that. And I found that really, that is what's healed me, because in my looking at the map, in my looking left and right on the street of why does everyone look like me, and in my yearning for diversity, and my yearning for where is my root system, this common thread is something's not right here. Like something doesn't add up. Something's not adding up in the school system. Something doesn't add up in work. Something doesn't add up in the health system. Something's not adding up in the disability system. What is this? And it's the way of being. It's that and so for me the land speaks, and the teachers that I've sought out are Indigenous people within, in this country that have been generous enough to let me sit next to them and listen to them whilst they, really provide me deep medicine that has made me in awe and in wonder for their culture, but more so than that has led me back to my own root system. And that's what I'm deeply grateful for. It's meant that I've reclaimed the myths. It's that I've reclaimed ritual and rites of passage that that I had in the culture that isn't this culture. But I'm not saying that we go backwards at all. That's not at all what I think. But I think that to look at the stories that we have that are like dominant, the hero's journey, or the extractive story, or the exploitative story, or all of these stories that have been so dominant for some time, I'm interested in how we can re-story. And I think a key part of that is centering ourselves back in the web of being and belonging, which is in a circle, not on the top. And once we drop into that, I think we have this whole other opportunity and guidance on how we could live.
Yeah. So suppose in ancestral myth or Indigenous myth, is there a reframing of the hero's journey? Is it, or yeah?
Yeah, I mean, in so many of the myths that, because myth is born of a place, and again, we are a culture of I'm talking about my culture as oral storytellers, as much of the world was, and that the text that we use and the written language then started to take some of the meaning out of the oral stories. But like the fruiting body, they would pop up for that place, and then they would evolve into the next place and make. And in all the myths, there's always the trees that speak and the rocks. It's a complete animate experience. And I think, what was your question?
No,
just going to go to hero's journey.
Yeah.
I just keep saying foxwoman when you're speaking of myth for some reason. And I don't think any of those, like, yes, there is this, those myths have been taken now to portray and be used as this justification for the human experience that we're slaying and that we're conquering. But I think there's so many other sub stories within the story that have been like shut down or cut out, but they're bubbling and they're rising.
Yep.
And yeah, I don't know if you've ever read the carrier bag theory. No. Phenomenal essay about the opposite of the hero's journey. And I think that's those sorts of stories, the stories that talk about community and the collective, and that not being just a humanistic experience, that being one of an ecological one and a multi-realm one that brings in that is actually makes us think about us, not I.
Yep.
And that's liberating. Like if you can wake up and think about we, and the relationships that we're in, as opposed to just me and my thing. I feel like it just takes the pressure off. And it's kind of back to the time thing, is it's not about what I'm doing in my lifetime. I'm getting up every day thinking about 7 generations from now. So if I can just tend to a little seed in this lifetime, that's okay, because that's what we're all doing. It's not my own quest and this legacy that I need to leave behind. And if I do, that's pretty fun. But it's not, I think it's decentering that need for the individual quest and about on the
That's
collective one.
Yeah. But also going back to your favorite word, journey, because you have a little van, a little troopy, and you've traveled extensively throughout Australia, working with Indigenous communities. What was the work you were doing?
All sorts of work. Yeah. I started that, traveling all the trial sites and talking about people's experience. And the main reason why I was traveling around, back in 2013, 14, 15 was that regional and remote, particularly remote Aboriginal communities, were not being included in the design of the NDIS, and a market model isn't going to work, in so many parts of Australia, let alone in urban areas. And we needed a different approach, and I was really passionate about that. But then it kind of evolved, and that's when I started working with Foria around and yourself and
past guest of the podcast, by the way.
Love it. Around how we capture storytelling, language, culture and country in virtual reality as a mode for social change, which was phenomenal. And that's just evolved into different projects and work over time. And I think being in the troopy, a number of things is possible in that you're not just driving in and driving out of somewhere, or flying in, flying out without the relationship. It's not transactional. It's being able to pop up somewhere, stay for as long as as long as you want, make cups of tea out the back, be able to store heaps of biscuits in the back, and kind of have a little mini roving home that I was invited to sit down and listen, and I had the gift of time. And I think we don't spend enough time with each other. And I think story and people's story, it's what can change social policy. I know that for me in the social policy space, when you've got story, it's what moves people. It's what propels people towards understanding and wanting to change. But also being, even if nothing changed, being really truly heard. And someone listening to your story is life-changing. Like, think about the times when someone's really listened to me and it's profound. And we don't spend enough time listening. We might listen for the sake of co-design or listen for this, but it's always with an attached agenda or an attached outcome. And when you attach yourself to an outcome, the person that you're listening to knows that. And you're not listening. You're listening to verify or validate your outcome. So a lot of the time when I was traveling, I was in between projects as well. The listening practice was more rife than ever, and it would just build these relationships and for me, that's how I started creating work, was that I would do project work would bring in income so I could eat, but that I'd have enough time to be able to do a lot of listening and a lot of advocacy work for families, and still maintain a counselling practice. And this could all be, for free, as we would say, because I just had worked my life out. This is what I need to eat, and the rest is like me giving in the world, as opposed to me, working for someone and being like really structured, and that wouldn't align with how I want to listen and how I want to show up in the world. So it was a wild time.
Because the other thing is, there's listening and there's time, and how kind of I'm guilty of it right now, because I'm listening to you.
And you're looking at the time.
No. No, but I suppose while I'm listening to you, I'm trying to process your story and think about the next question I'm going to ask you, which is not really kind of deep listening.
Yeah.
You know, I should just listen to you. But I suppose what you're talking about is this relationship between listening and time, and how that's so different in like an indigenous landscape where time is
Stretched.
and it's spread out, and even conversations are circular
Yeah.
and not linear.
Yeah.
You know. Mm.
Absolutely. And it's about relationship. And that's what I've been yearning. Like, that's the missing thing for me is my life, as I was saying before. Like, I didn't feel like I belonged anywhere for quite some time. But it's because it was literally a perspective shift around going from thinking it's me in the world without relationship to somewhere, rather than I'm actually, like, in a split second you can change your thinking around what am I in relationship with,
Yep.
which is then all of a sudden you're in a million relationships.
Not necessarily with people, but just the
And that's the thing. It's not with people. You know, it's the stories, and the listening isn't about human individual. This is what's happening to me. It's a whole mixed bag of species and beings, and you know, and that listening is feeling into that with your whole body, like not your ears or not just your eyes, but you know, all of the sensual part that can like feel and intuit and trust and tap into that space between someone that we don't have enough time to explore.
Yeah.
You know?
So to bring this full circle, like, where are you now on Earth, and what are you doing?
Doing lots of different things, as usual. But yeah, as I said, moved up to the Kimberley, and what I'm really interested about that is tending to land up there and bringing a lot of friends up throughout this year for very many different reasons. One of those is a walk that's happening on country up there, on Mangala country in July this year, which is really a fight for the Mangala people's country, and fight against fracking and mining. So that's happening, but tending to the land up there, and this land that's been obviously stolen and then smashed with farming and cattle, and so we're trying to regenerate that, but I don't yet know how to really plant. So I've been doing a lot of Googling. But I'm really interested in a bridge between the East Coast and the Kimberley as well. And there's a few of us that are really feeling into that. So that's there. I also work for an Aboriginal controlled organisation on a few different projects, but largely looking at centering traditional healing back into the mental health and counselling service system, which it's never been in before.